It was a bright Saturday morning in a quiet, upscale suburb, the kind of neighborhood where the trees were evenly spaced, the lawns trimmed like golf courses, and the people walking their dogs knew each other by name. Birds chirped softly overhead, and a gentle breeze swept through the park, nestled at the edge of a gated community. It was the kind of place built on comfort, calm, and unspoken rules, and apparently, Marcus Williams didn't fit the picture. He was sitting on a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree, sipping coffee from a reusable cup, dressed in a clean hoodie, joggers, and running shoes. He had just finished a 3-mile loop around the walking path that curved through the park, a daily ritual ever since he'd moved into the area 3 months ago. Earbuds out, music off, Marcus was soaking in the sun, watching a few kids throw a frisbee nearby, letting his mind wander in the kind of peace that used to be rare for him. Until he heard the voice. "Excuse me, do you live around here?" He looked up. A middle-aged white woman with short blonde hair and a deep frown stood a few feet away, arms crossed, posture rigid. She was wearing a zip-up fleece jacket, holding a small dog leash in one hand, though the dog was nowhere in sight. Marcus raised an eyebrow politely. "Yeah, I live nearby." "Where exactly?" she asked, the tone sharpening. "This park is private. It's for residents only." The insinuation wasn't new. He had heard it before. It's in grocery stores, gyms, elevators. But that didn't make it any less grating. He didn't move, just looked at her and took another sip of his coffee. "I don't think I need to explain myself," he replied calmly. The woman's lips tightened. "Well, I've never seen you before, and I walk this park every day. I know everyone who lives here. So, unless you're visiting someone, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Marcus blinked slowly, letting her words hang in the air. "You're asking me to leave a public bench in a park I helped design?" That stopped her. Her brows furrowed, confused. "Design?" He nodded casually. "This park. The trees, the trail, the benches, the drainage system under the footbridge. I approved all of it. In fact, if you check the plaque by the west gate, it has my name on it. Marcus Williams. I own this land." She went completely still. Her eyes darted around like she was suddenly unsure of what reality she was standing in. Marcus didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He just met her gaze, steady and cool. "I bought this property last year," he continued. "The Homeowners Association leases it from my company. You're standing on my grass." The woman's mouth opened slightly as if she wanted to object, but the words never came. Her face turned a shade paler. She took an awkward step back, gripping the empty leash like it might give her balance. I didn't know," she stammered. "I just thought—" Marcus stood up, tall and calm, brushing off his sleeves. "You thought I didn't belong here," he said plainly. A long silence. The wind moved through the trees again, but now the calmness had been replaced with discomfort. The woman muttered something about needing to find her dog and turned quickly, walking away without looking back. Marcus sat back down, picked up his coffee, and looked out at the frisbee kids again. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He didn't smile. He didn't feel triumphant. Because this wasn't new. It wasn't rare. It was just the latest reminder that in some neighborhoods, black ownership still came as a shock. But he had no intention of leaving. The incident didn't leave Marcus shaken. It just left him tired. Tired in that deep, quiet way he'd learned to carry since his 20s. The kind that doesn't drain you all at once, but chips away at you every time you're asked to justify your presence. Still, he didn't tell anyone about what happened that morning. He didn't post it online, didn't mention it in his work group chat, and didn't bring it up to the landscapers who waved at him as he walked back toward his house an hour later. His home, a modern 2-story structure with sharp lines, solar panels, and tall windows, sat just 2 blocks from the park, behind a coated gate and surrounded by trees he'd personally chosen from a sustainable nursery. He wasn't trying to flex when he bought it. Marcus simply wanted peace, privacy, maybe even a fresh start. But by Monday, the story traveled faster than he had expected. It started subtly, the way the barista at the local cafe hesitated before asking for his name, the way the mail carrier suddenly referred to him as "Sir" with practiced caution. And then, the HOA president called. Not emailed, not sent a formal notice. She called directly. "Mr. Williams," she said, the tone syrupy but tight, "we had a misunderstanding in the park this weekend, and I just wanted to assure you that we're looking into it. Marcus was silent on the other end. We, we're trying to foster a more inclusive tone in the neighborhood, she continued. There are still some growing pains, as you can imagine, but I hope this doesn't reflect poorly on our community. He almost laughed. Your community? He said calmly. Ma'am, I own part of your community. A beat of silence followed. Yes, she said awkwardly. Of course. We're very grateful for your investment. We've actually been hoping to speak with you about some ideas for future developments, perhaps a dog run or shaded pergolas by the North Side Trail. So this was it. Damage control. PR. Not concern for what happened, but concern for how it might be perceived if Marcus spoke out. I'll think about it, he said, and ended the call. But by Thursday, the woman from the park appeared again, this time on his doorstep. She stood there nervously, hands clutching a tote bag, a half-hearted smile on her face. He saw her through the glass before he opened the door, and he nearly didn't, but something told him to let her speak. Hi, she began, voice small. I wanted to apologize. I shouldn't have assumed anything the other day. I was out of line. Marcus crossed his arms, leaning slightly against the doorway. You were, he said, not unkindly, but directly. She nodded quickly. I know. And I've been thinking about it since. I talked to my husband. We both agreed that it's not okay. She paused, looking down. I didn't grow up around many people who, you know. He raised an eyebrow. No, I don't know. Say it. She swallowed hard. Black people? The word hung between them. Then maybe it's time you get used to it, he said. She nodded, visibly embarrassed. You're right. He didn't invite her in. He didn't offer forgiveness. He simply listened, then gently closed the door once she'd finished. Not slamming it. Not rudely. Just with the quiet finality of a man who understood what it meant to protect his peace. He stood in the hallway for a moment afterward, hand still on the doorknob. There was no satisfaction, no vengeance, just the slow burn of realization that even when you own the land beneath your feet, you still have to defend your right to stand on it. But Marcus didn't move into that neighborhood to feel accepted. He moved in to remind everyone there that they didn't get to define who belonged. The neighborhood's silence grew louder in the days that followed. Not an obvious kind of silence, but the subtle, loaded kind. The too long glances during morning dog walks, the quick turning away when Marcus made eye contact at the mailbox, the strained greetings that always seemed a beat too late. It wasn't hostility. It was discomfort. And Marcus had lived long enough to know that in certain circles, discomfort was just another shape of fear. But he kept walking to the park every morning, kept sitting on the same bench beneath the same tree, drinking his coffee like clockwork. He wasn't doing it to provoke. He just refused to be chased off his own land. Still, the looks kept coming. Then, one morning, something changed. Marcus was about to start his second lap around the trail when he saw two teenagers spray painting the far side of the maintenance shed, a corner mostly hidden from view by overgrown hedges. At first, he thought they might just be messing around. But as he got closer, his stomach turned. The letters were big and slanted, black paint on white metal. Go back where you came from. The message stopped him cold. His breath caught in his throat, not from shock, but from the heavy familiarity of it. He'd seen versions of this since he was 12 years old. But seeing it here, on his own property, written in bold, dripping lines, ignited something deep and sharp. The boys hadn't seen him yet. They were still laughing, music playing softly from one of their phones. Marcus took out his phone and snapped a picture of them and the graffiti. He didn't shout, didn't approach. He backed away quietly and dialed the police. Within 15 minutes, 2 cruisers arrived, and with them, 2 officers, both white, stepped out, one of them immediately scanning Marcus up and down as if deciding whether he was a credible source. Marcus kept his voice calm, crisp, deliberate. I own this land. Those 2 were spray painting hate speech on a building I built. I have pictures, and I want to press charges. One officer blinked, still catching up. You own this? Marcus nodded. Yes. You can check the deed. It took another few minutes for the teenagers to be rounded up. No handcuffs, no raised voices, just soft warnings and polite talking tos. One officer even laughed along with them. Marcus noticed every detail. "You gonna take this seriously?" he asked finally, watching the kids get led to the squad car like they were just pranksters, not trespassers leaving racial slurs. The younger officer, the one who hadn't cracked a smile, looked Marcus in the eye and said, "Yes, sir. I am." That was enough for now. Later that evening, Marcus called a crew to clean up the shed. They painted it over in silence. And once the white coat was dry, Marcus took out a can of his own, black paint, thick brush. He walked up to the wall and began to write something new, something simple. "This land belongs to all of us, but I paid for it. Remember that." By the next morning, neighbors were whispering about it. Some called it provocative, others inspiring. But no one dared ask Marcus to remove it, because for the first time, they were starting to realize he wasn't just a man in their neighborhood. He was a man reclaiming space that had always been his, whether they liked it or not. A week after painting his message on the shed wall, Marcus found himself standing at the center of a quiet storm. Not a literal one. The sky was blue, the trees gently swaying, but the kind of storm that simmers behind windows and closed-door meetings. The kind that looks polite on the surface but pulses with resistance underneath. The HOA had called an emergency meeting, and though no one mentioned him by name in the email, Marcus knew he was the reason chairs were being unfolded in the community clubhouse that Saturday morning. He didn't have to attend. As the landowner, he wasn't required to sit through their agenda or answer to their concerns. But he went anyway, not because he wanted their approval, but because he wanted them to look him in the eye when they tried to police who belonged in a space he helped build. The clubhouse was a clean, windowed structure with high ceilings and fluorescent lighting that made everything look sterile. When Marcus entered, heads turned. Some people nodded awkwardly. Others looked away. A few, like Mrs. Keene, the same woman who'd confronted him in the park, smiled too much, her face strained from holding it together. The HOA president, a man named Richard Kellerman, cleared his throat and welcomed everyone. He was in his late 50s, balding with a clipped voice and the rehearsed politeness of someone used to getting his way. "We're here today to discuss the recent incidents surrounding the community park and the visibility of personal messages on HOA property," he said, glancing toward Marcus, without directly naming him. "We've had concerns raised by residents who feel that certain displays may be divisive." There it was. Marcus leaned back in his folding chair, arms crossed. Another board member, a woman with pearl earrings and a stiff posture, chimed in. "No one is saying that Mr. Williams hasn't contributed to the community. But messages painted on public structures without prior approval set a precedent. What if someone else painted something political or religious? We have to think about consistency." Marcus raised his hand, not waiting for permission. "I didn't paint anything political," he said. "I painted a truth." The room quieted. "And just to clarify," he continued, "that public structure sits on land I own. So technically, if anyone should have asked for approval, it was your HOA when you built that shed, which I allowed without asking you to explain what color the door would be." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Richard forced a smile. "We're not trying to target you, Mr. Williams. We just want to maintain the harmony of the community." Marcus looked around the room. "You want harmony? Start with accountability, not paint." There was a beat of silence, and then, surprisingly, a voice from the back of the room, a young woman with a stroller next to her, spoke up. "I think the message was powerful," she said. "My son plays in that park. I want him to grow up knowing that people like Mr. Williams are part of this community, that they help build it." More murmurs followed, not arguments, support. And for the first time, Marcus saw the balance shift. Not completely, but enough to know that silence wasn't unanimous anymore. The meeting ended without a vote. The board decided to table the conversation for another time. But Marcus knew what that meant. They weren't going to push it any further. Not after being challenged. Not when the neighborhood was listening. When he stepped out into the sun again, He didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded, because standing in that sterile room, surrounded by faces that once looked through him, Marcus had reminded them, and himself, that ownership isn't just about land or titles, it's about voice, and his would not be painted over. Later that week, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. A printed envelope had been left at his front door, addressed by hand. Inside was a glossy card from the Heritage Hills Community Cultural Committee, inviting him to a neighborhood event titled Celebrating Our Shared Spaces. The irony didn't go unnoticed. Just 2 weeks earlier, they were questioning whether he belonged in those spaces at all. Now, they were asking him to help celebrate them. The event was scheduled for Saturday afternoon in the very park where the confrontation had taken place. There would be food trucks, games for kids, a small outdoor stage, and apparently, a local leader's welcome speech. His name was printed in the program. Marcus considered throwing the card away. He wasn't interested in being the neighborhood's redemption arc, the token example of how far we've come. But something deeper tugged at him. Maybe it was the thought of the next person, the next black homeowner, the next immigrant family, the next kid who didn't look like everyone else, who might be questioned for sitting on a bench they paid for with their taxes. Maybe it was time to be visible, on his own terms. When he arrived at the park, it was already buzzing with families. Kids with painted faces chased balloons, couples strolled with dogs, and lawn chairs dotted the grassy stretch by the stage. The same woman who had once yelled at him now stood behind a lemonade table, waving nervously when their eyes met. He nodded back, neutral. As he walked closer to the stage, a small group of teenagers passed him, whispering something that made one of them laugh. He didn't react. But a middle-aged Latino man standing nearby, who caught the comment too, gave Marcus a small nod of solidarity. The tide was shifting, not quickly, but noticeably. When it was time for his speech, Marcus stepped up to the small platform and looked out at the crowd. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his voice steady. "I wasn't planning to speak," he began, "because honestly, I wasn't sure what to say to a group of people who've spent more time looking at me than seeing me." A few people stiffened in their seats. "But I'm here. And I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here because this park, this land, is meant to be shared. It was designed for people to feel safe, to feel welcome. All people." He paused, letting the words settle. But that only works if we all decide to stop policing each other's presence and start protecting each other's dignity. There was no applause yet, just quiet. He scanned the faces, some guilty, some curious, some finally paying attention. "I own the land beneath this park. But ownership doesn't mean control. It means responsibility. And I take that seriously. I hope we all do." This time, the silence was followed by hesitant clapping. Then a little more. Then a wave. Not roaring, not performative. Just real. As Marcus stepped down, a young black girl, maybe 10 years old, walked up to him, holding a snow cone. She looked up, eyes wide. "You own a park?" she asked, almost in disbelief. He smiled. "Yeah. Kinda cool, right?" She nodded, then ran off toward her parents. And for the first time since he moved in, Marcus felt something shift inside himself. Not just a sense of being seen, but of being rooted. Not because they'd welcomed him, because he had claimed the space for what it always should have been. Home. A few days after the park event, Marcus received another knock at his door. But this time, it wasn't awkward HOA members or a neighbor bearing a forced apology. It was a journalist, a young black woman named Talia, from a local paper who introduced herself with a warm smile and a leather-bound notebook in hand. She'd heard about the incident in the park, the graffiti, and the community's complicated response. What interested her most, though, was not the controversy. It was the story of a black man who quietly owned the very land people assumed he didn't belong on. "I'm not here to make you a symbol," she said. "I just think your story matters." Marcus was hesitant at first. He'd built his life on discretion, success without spectacle. But something about Talia's presence, the genuine curiosity, the familiar quiet strength, made him pause. He invited her to sit on the porch, and for the next hour, he spoke freely about his background in urban planning, how he came up from nothing, started his firm with two friends, and a loan no bank wanted to give them, and how he now owned 6 parcels across the county, including the land this neighborhood park was built on. Talia didn't interrupt much. She just listened. "Why here?" she finally asked. "Why move to a place like this? You had options." Marcus looked out at the tree-lined streets. "Because I wanted to show what it looks like when someone like me doesn't just make it, but plants roots, builds equity. Not in a loud, flashy way, just in a way that's undeniable." She nodded slowly. "And what would you say to someone reading this who still sees you as an outsider?" He smiled faintly. "I'd say, just because you arrived first doesn't mean you belong more." The interview ran the following week. The headline read, "He designed the park they tried to push him out of." It wasn't sensational, but it was honest. The story spread, faster than Marcus expected. It landed on social media, was reposted by a few prominent local activists, and before long, the article was cited in a city planning blog. People began to recognize him at the grocery store. A few strangers came up to thank him. One older black man shook his hand and said, "You don't know what it means for my grandson to see you out here." But not all the attention was positive. Anonymous flyers began appearing on lampposts around the neighborhood. Poorly written accusations about outsiders trying to change our values and agenda-driven landowners. It was thinly veiled, full of coded language. Marcus took photos of them, sent them to the HOA, and kept walking. Then, one morning, as he jogged past the west entrance of the park, he found the metal plaque with his name on it had been ripped off the stone base, just gone. He stood there for a long time, staring at the empty bolts where his name used to be. Not angry, not even surprised, just reminded that even when you pave the path, someone will try to erase your footprints. He didn't call the police, didn't demand an apology. He went home, ordered a new plaque, larger this time, and had it installed with cement and reinforced bolts. Below his name, he added a second line: "Presence is power." And this time, when neighbors walked by, no one questioned why it was there, because by now, even those who still didn't get it couldn't ignore it. The final change didn't come with a speech, a newspaper headline, or a viral post. It came quietly, as most real change does. On a cool Saturday morning, Marcus stepped outside with his coffee and noticed something unusual. The park was already full. Children darted between swings and slides. A group of older residents did yoga under the pergola, and a young interracial couple walked hand in hand down the trail. What stood out wasn't their presence, but the energy. Relaxed, unbothered, genuine. No stiff shoulders, no wary glances. The message on the maintenance shed still stood, untouched. His new plaque remained firmly in place. The whispered rumors had faded. The flyers had stopped. And the woman who once yelled at him in the park? She now waved from across the street every few days. It was never warm, not quite, but it was real, honest. And sometimes, that's enough. Later that day, Marcus attended a community planning meeting. Not a defensive one. Not one where he had to justify himself. It was a working session, one he was asked to lead. Not out of guilt, not to check a box, but because people had finally realized that he brought vision and value. When he entered the room, he no longer felt like an outsider pushing through walls. He felt like a cornerstone. After the meeting, one of the younger board members approached him, a new neighbor named Elijah, a black man in his early 30s with a baby on the way. He looked nervous but excited. "I just wanted to say thank you," Elijah said. "You being here, it made me and my wife decide this was the right place to raise our kid." Marcus was quiet for a second, then smiled. "You're not raising your kid in the right place because of me. You're doing it because of you. I just showed up first." That night, Marcus sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the neighborhood he once had to fight to belong to. He thought about legacy, not the kind you build in boardrooms or bank accounts, but the kind that plants itself quietly in the soil of a community and slowly reshapes it from the inside out. He didn't need statues or monuments or even a parade of praise. All he needed was what he'd always claimed from day one: the right to exist fully, freely, and without apology. And as the evening breeze drifted through the park he once walked alone, now filled with laughter and life, Marcus finally allowed himself to exhale. Not because the work was done, but because now he wasn't doing it alone.